Hi everyone, so first thing you need is an A5 book, preferably one that's a hardback. If you've got a hardback book, it's thicker, the cover's thicker, and also it's less likely to warp when you do this. Get a piece of cardboard, this is just cereal box card, and cut it to the size of the front cover. And you also need a piece that will go on the spine as well. And then what you need to do is the piece that's going to go on the front cover, you need to cut it into strips. Don't cut it perfectly, try and cut them a little bit wiggly. You want them to look a bit more like natural wood, or well-worn sort of broken down bits of wood. So you don't want it to be perfectly straight or anything, you want it to look slightly bent. Cut it into strips, and then when you glue them onto the board, onto the cover, you want to leave a gap in between each one, because we don't want it to be looking like a perfectly made door. We want it to look like it's old, it's a bit battered, and it's a bit sort of weather worn, so it's going to have gaps in between the boards. And to stick those down, I'm just using hot glue. I find hot glue is better because it dries quicker and it's less likely to cause the cardboard to warp or anything. Because obviously if you get the cardboard wet, it's going to buckle. Whereas using the hot glue, it sets really quick, and B, you can get a nice smooth, get the cardboard to lay nice and smooth on the cover. And then all I had to do was cut another strip just to fill in that gap. Again, I'm not going for precision. I don't want it to be all perfectly lined up or anything. And then just as I squeeze some glue out of my glue gun, what I'm doing is I'm rubbing up and down each strip of the paper, well, the card, with the glue. This is to add the wood texture. You can do it if you just get like an old biro and just draw wiggly lines up and down for the wood texture. I decided to use my glue gun just because I know I'm going to add some stuff over the top, so I just wanted to start off that wood texture. And I did this all over each board, and then just rubbed over the top with the glue gun over the glue, just to create the textures. Then I added the piece on the spine as well. Now obviously the book I've chosen here, this is an old sketchbook which I'm about halfway through, so the cover is a bit battered. Obviously it is better if you use one that's got a decent cover on, but when I cover it with everything in a bit, it does protect that and cover that cracked area, so it does reinforce the book, so it doesn't matter. And just make sure that when you stick the piece on the spine, that you stick it nice and secure, and also check afterwards, when you've finished doing the cover, that you can still open the book properly, like so. If you find that bits lift up or get jammed against each other when you try and open the book, you might just have to trim off the cardboard a little bit. Then the next thing you need to do is coat all of this in a layer of PVA glue. Don't worry about mixing it with water or anything, literally just the glue as is perfectly fine for this. So as you can see, I've put plenty on, and then coat the whole thing in that glue. Make sure you put plenty on, and make sure you cover every little single patch of the cardboard and hot glue mixture. Make sure you get round the edges as well, because obviously you've got to make sure that everything's stuck down even around the edges. And then what you need to do is you need to find a large sheet of tissue or multiple sheets of tissue. Separate it into the separate plies, so just one ply at a time, so one layer of tissue at a time. And ideally you want a tissue that's got no pattern to it. And what you do is you put more glue over the top, and then as you can see, that gives it the wood a more wrinkly texture. Then I actually use my heat gun to dry this all off, but you can use a hairdryer, or you can just leave it to dry for about an hour. Then take some black acrylic paint and mix it with a little bit of water, and then coat the entire thing in the black paint. Make sure you cover every little nook and cranny. Make sure you leave no whites whatsoever, because otherwise it'll stand out like a sore thumb afterwards. This is like your base layer. This is like the base coat. I like to do black first because it makes the colours look deeper and more dull, which is the effect I wanted. And if it's watered down, it just helps it spread around a lot easier and get into all those little nooks and crannies, because obviously there's a lot of texture on this book. Just to let you know as well, you do the same thing on the back cover. I didn't show on video doing the back cover. I just filmed doing the front cover and the spine. But the back cover, it's exactly the same process, just with slightly less detail. Like I didn't put the hinges or anything on the back cover. But obviously I haven't done that yet on the front, but you'll see later in the video. So as you can see, I've coated the whole thing in the black, and then I'm just using my heat gun just to very carefully dry that paint off, so I can start doing the dry brushing. If you don't dry the black before doing the dry brushing, it'll just all mush together and make a muddy mess. And also it can lift, so it's better if you can actually dry it off with a heat gun or hairdryer first. If not, just leave the acrylic paint in a warm room for about half an hour, it'll be fine, but I use a heat gun because I'm impatient. All I'm doing here is I realised that the cracks were getting covered up between the pieces of wood, so I've just used the handle of my brush just to scrape off some of that tissue paper mix to make sure that the cracks will still be visible later on when I did the dry brushing. And obviously this stage, it's worth doing any touch-ups and stuff before you start doing the dry brushing. It is possible to do little alterations and corrections later on, as you'll see, but it's easier if you can do it first before you do all the paint effects. And again, just use my heat gun to dry it all off. When I was filming this, as you can see, the sun was blazing through the window, so it was actually quite warm anyway, so it was drying pretty quick on its own. But I just used the heat gun just to speed it up a bit. And that's where I'd noticed there was a little spot of hot glue was affecting the look of the gaps in between the boards. So I just heated the hot glue up with my heat gun and then pressed my palette knife into it just to put that ridge back, because that's going to give you the effect of looking like separate planks nailed together later on. And obviously if it's all covered up, you can't see it anymore. Then start by adding a layer of brown over the top of the black. I'm using burnt umber here, and it's quite a light burnt umber. It's the blob of brown paint on the palette. And what I'm doing now is mixing that with a bit of white and a bit of grey, and then wiping most of it off my brush, and then I'm using that to dry brush over the top of the brown. Obviously I'm dabbing at the moment, sorry. So I dabbed this lighter colour on first of all, and then used my paper towel to help blend it in a bit. I do go over this again. This is just to create different sort of depths of colour, light patches, dark patches. I don't want it to look like it's perfect wood. And anywhere where it looks like the splodges are a bit too unrealistic or not blended in, just go over it with a wash of black afterwards. Then dry that layer off with the heat gun or a hairdryer, and then it's time to start the dry brushing. To do the dry brushing, all you do is you get some of that brown and add a little bit more white to it, and a bit more, just a little spot of black, because you want it to be sort of like a browny grey. And then mix it with a bit of white. As you can see, that's the colour I'm kind of going for. And then dry brush that over the top, just basically tickling the surface of the book with the very tips of the bristles of the brush, because you just want this to pick up on the highly textured areas, just to show up the texture. This is to make the texture stand out more. And all you do is you add varying amounts of this. You do some bits lighter, some bits darker, and keep going until you're satisfied that the texture is showing enough, and you're happy with the effect and the colour. And I went back and forth. Sometimes I put like quite light bits on, then I'd go over with another little wash of black. If you feel an area looks like you've put too much white paint on it, just take some very watered down black and go over the top of it to do like a black wash over the top, and that just tones down those colours if you start to feel that they're looking a bit bright. Then I took my black and again dry brush with that, but this time what I did is I went round the corners of the book, basically to sort of fade out the corners and make the centre of the book cover like the sort of focus area, as it were. I kind of like it as like a framing effect to the book, and also that was like, I used that to create sort of like staining at the bottom, as if the bottom of the doors got damp. And also what you need to do before you do anything else is take a very thin brush and just go in between those boards with a bit of black, just to make them stand back out, because doing the lighter coat of brown can make it so that those gaps don't stand out very well. So as you can see here, I've just got a very fine liner brush, and I'm just using the black and going in between those cracks just to make the board's edges stand out more. As you can see, in some areas I'd lost the definition of the space between the boards, and it just makes it look like it's one flat piece of wood, and I wanted it to look like separate boards. And I just went over and added a bit of dry brushing here and there where I felt it needed it, and went over edges of any boards where I felt it needed to be a bit darker. And if you get any of the black on the surface of the board where you don't want it, just quickly wipe it off with your finger, it'll come off straight away. And you can always dry brush over the top anyway, it's no biggie. Then I started adding some more to the bottom, because I wanted it to look like it's got damp, it's got soggy, because obviously that's the end of the door that's nearest the floor, so it tends to get damp, it tends to get soggy, and tends to get more dirty than the rest of the board. So I just went over with these little washes of black, just anywhere where I wanted to look like there was sort of staining from getting damp. Then after adding a little dab of green here and there to make it look like there's a little bit of moss on the door, I added these little pieces of cardboard for hinges. I do actually alter the shape of these slightly. I shouldn't have cut them so straight. I kind of wanted them to look like those old hand-wrought iron barn door hinges. So these were too neat. So what I did was actually take them back off and just cut around them a bit wiggly. I'm using my hot glue gun to create little domes of glue for the nail heads. And I also added 2 rectangles of cardboard on the hinge, on the spine, which is how I'm going to create the hinge you'll see in a little bit. And then at this stage I was figuring out how I was going to do the handle, and I had a couple of ideas. And I thought I was going to use this method first, but I didn't like the look of it. But I left the 2 pieces there and stuck those down, which later on was a mistake, but at this stage I didn't realise. But it's okay, I'll fix it. Because I wasn't 100% sure how I was going to do the handle. And then I had a look on Google for old barn iron handles, like for barn doors, that sort of thing. And I found one which was how I decided to make it in the end. So at this stage I'm having a bit of a think, and I'm trying to decide how I can make it look a bit like 3D instead of just flat for the handle. And also I altered where some of my little dots of glue were to create the nail heads. And you have to make sure that you leave the book perfectly flat while you do this. If you tilt the book up, the little blobs of glue will run. So once I was happy that the little blobs of glue had set, I did the same on the rectangles that I'd put on the spine of the book to make it look like they are bolted to the book. And it's just a case of holding the book up. It only takes like a minute for the glue to cool. Well, less than that for glue dots, the dots this size. So I just held the book up just for a very short time and let those glue dots set before laying the book back down on its back. This is also why I didn't do the back cover of the book straight away, because otherwise I'd have to have had the book folded out weird and flat. I found it easy to do the front cover first and the spine, and then do the back cover later on. So yeah, I took off those 2 bits I didn't like, and then just touched up the paintwork with a bit of black and dried that with my heat gun. This is where I decided how I wanted the hinges to look and the handle to look. So here I'm just altering stuff and fixing things. So the first thing I had to do was take the bottom hinge off, which you'll see me do shortly, and then I had to just cut around with my scissors just to make it look a bit more wiggly, because if iron stuff's made by hand, it's not as perfectly straight and level as it would be if it's machine cut. So obviously I wanted to create that effect. And here what I'm doing is I'm taking a very small piece of paper and rolling it around the thinnest thing I could find, which happened to be a very fine crocheting hook. And this is to create the tubular shape for the handle, because I wanted it to look like just a stick of wrought iron that had been fastened to the door as the handle. So I stuck that into place. And then I wanted it to look like it had got these like iron strappings holding it down. So I cut 2 very small rectangular pieces out of paper and glued those in position to be the like the brackets that hold the handle to the door. I do tweak that one later on because I realised it was slightly uneven. And also, by the way, when you do these, you can add like a little old rustic sign to the door if you wanted to, obviously depending on what you want to use the book for. This is actually an art journal of mine, so I'm just going to leave the book as it is. But you could do like a really old antiqued looking sign saying keep out, or whatever you want it to say, just to add to that effect. Like you could actually have a little label on the door, like a little sign. You could even have a sign saying closed or open or something, whatever, but I chose not to in the end because I couldn't decide what I wanted. And this is the stage where I'm cutting the hinges to be a bit more wiggly. And I tried doing it with my craft knife, but I may have accidentally blunted the actual blade because I had trouble actually cutting the card. So in the end, I just peeled it off the book. Luckily, I hadn't stuck it down with too much glue, and cut round it with my scissors, just to make the edges look all wiggly, make it look more like it's a hand-wrought iron hinge as opposed to something really neat and tidy. Basically, I want it to look rustic. I think that's the word, rustic. And then once I've trimmed it, it's a case of sticking it in place. And here's where I realised that bit of handle wasn't level, so I had to fix that as well. And here I just took off the top hinge. As you can see, it sometimes makes a bit of a mess, but it's easy enough to peel off that little bit of paper. And the glue doesn't matter because I'll cover it again in a minute. So I'm just trimming around, making that hinge the same as the bottom one. And obviously at this stage, the little dots of glue that I've put for little rivets or nail heads have dried. And that's just me checking I can still open and close the book. As you can see, that's one of my sketches. That was from, that was like a t-shirt design idea when I did the Embrace Your Weird merchandise stuff, which is on my Redbubble store. I've got to add more to that actually. I haven't finished doing that yet, that reminds me. And then here I've got little pieces of paper, stuck them onto the hinge and then folded them around the spine of the book onto the piece that's on the spine. And that's how I made it look like the hinge was actually joined to the spine area. And also that gave me the flexibility that I can still open and close the book without it getting in the way. Then I took my liner brush and painted all of those things black. I started off by doing the handle. You'll see later on how I make the handle stand out more, because obviously at this stage painting it black, it sort of just blends in with the rest of the book and doesn't really stand out and look like anything. But trust me, I've got to do some more stuff. This is just like the base layer like I did for the whole book. And the acrylic paint will stick to the hot glue. Just don't have it very watered down, have quite neat, you know, straight out the tube acrylic paint. It will stick. I am going to varnish this, by the way, afterwards as well, in case you're wondering. So once you've painted everything and everything's all in place, just add a layer of varnish later on to finish the book off just nicely. Matte varnish would be is better. You can use gloss varnish on the hinges and the handle, but matte varnish for the wood's better, by the way. And I've got what's the brand I've got? I think my Liquitex matte varnish is what I used in the end on it, I believe. Yeah, Liquitex matte varnish. And then once you've painted the handle, you want to paint all those little hinges as well. And you can see it already looks better just painted black. It doesn't look so obvious that it's cardboard anymore, which is what I like about using this technique. And obviously don't forget to paint where the hinges are on the spine as well. And to be honest, you could leave them black if you wanted to. I do add a bit more to them, which you'll see in a bit. But if you really wanted to, you could just have the hinges black if you liked. Maybe dry brush a little bit of grey on top just to make it stand out a bit more. You could do it that way if you wanted. I'm just going over the edges, making sure everything is covered. And then use your hot glue gun again, your hairdryer, or just leave it to dry for a little bit. For the next step, you do need the paint to be dry on the hinges and the handle. And then all you do is you take some, this is Luster Effects, it's like what do you call it, embossing type wax, gilding wax, that's the stuff. This is gilding wax I'm using. I used the silver one first, so I did a mixture of the silver and the gold. And all you do is you put a little bit of gilding wax on your finger and then just dab it on the little stumps of glue to represent the nail heads. Like so. And I did that on the handle as well, for the little nails that are holding the handle on as well. And I also dabbed a bit on the brackets and on the handle itself. And I also rubbed some of the gilding wax over the hinge. Not as much as obviously on the fake nails heads, but over the hinge as well. Then I did the same on the spine. I just like how it makes all the details stand out. And again, like I said, I'm just taking a little bit of the gilding wax on my finger and just dabbing it on. If I'd have thought about it, I could have got that piece of paper and maybe twisted it to look like those. Have you seen it on like a wrought iron fence where like the actual bars are actually twisted slightly to add like a sort of spiral effect? I could have done that on that handle, thinking about it. And then once I did that, I took a bit of black paint. Oh, this is me, sorry. This is me still actually smudging the gilding wax in. I was trying to work out how to get into the small areas, and I used a tissue in the end, just so I could add a bit more of the wax into place. And then I used just a little bit of black, which you might see me doing a bit, and I went round the edges of the hinge just to cover up where any gilding wax got onto the actual wood, and also to make it look darker around where the hinges are. I added a bit of green here and there as well, because I wanted it to look like maybe there's a bit of moss just starting on the door. It's an old door. And that's it. That's how I created this book cover. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. That's the back, by the way, in case you were wondering. Yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.